Hello whistlers everywhere. So today's video is all about tonguing and where to use tonguing and also where not to use tonguing. Well, simply put, you can play any tune you like and never use your tongue once. You can do it all with finger articulation, and the first video which I'm going to show is me playing a tune called The Coming of Spring, and I don't use a single tongue at all throughout the piece, not even to start the first phrase off. Now, tonguing is useful in certain respects, but not essential. You can play a whole tune, as I've mentioned, without ever using your tongue once, or you can use tonguing sparingly, or you can use a whole lot of tonguing. And there really is no consensus on how you use your tongue or where you, in fact, tongue notes. The most important thing to remember is not to use tonguing to obscure poor fingering articulation. And fingering articulation is the first and foremost thing which you should be working on. So as a beginner whistler, what you really need to start doing is to thinking about maybe not using your tongue as much or even at all, and learn to play with good finger movement and clean finger movement. As I mentioned just before, using your tongue can sometimes obscure poor finger movement, and of course it won't help you playing in the long run. So what I like to try and get my students to do, right from the get-go, is to use tonguing very sparingly, if at all. So if we're taking a tune that I've used for this one, a jig called The Coming of Spring, what I would recommend students do is to learn the piece first without any ornaments and only tongue at the beginning of the very first phrase. So the tune, which starts like this. So that would be the first phrase, and there I'm only using my tongue to articulate the very first part of the phrase. In fact, you don't even have to use your tongue at all, you can just blow. But it's a good idea to start each piece or each phrase by a gentle use of your tongue. It gives it a little bit more clarity, in my opinion, and it's also good to start with a bit of an emphasis on the first note. So with tonguing, without tonguing. So as you can hear, there's not a great deal of difference. I just think to start off the phrase with the tongue gives it a little bit more of a definitive kind of kick to start off each phrase. So I like to get people to start using tonguing very, very sparingly to start off with. There are some styles of whistle playing that use a lot of tonguing, and there are some styles of whistle playing that use very little tonguing, and they both work. It's what you like and what you prefer to do in terms of the sound you want and also the ornamentation you want. I mean, there's most of the ornamentation in whistle playing is done through our fingers, though we can use tonguing, especially like double or triple tonguing, to give kind of an accent to a note, or instead of simulating the kind of ornament that you'd get on the fiddle, like a bowed triplet, for instance. So a triple tongued ornament might go. which we can use on a number of different tunes, say like a so that's a different kind of use of the tonguing other than to start or to articulate using tongue. And we're using the triple tonguing in that instance as an ornament. And it sounds great. It's effective. A lot of whistle players don't use it. Some use it. And if you like it, I say use it, and make sure you've got nice, crisp, clean t, k, t, which is the articulation for the triple tonguing. It's a bit of a misnomer, triple tonguing, because we're not going da da da. We're going t, k, t. So the first t is with the tongue, and then we use the back of the throat k sound, and then we repeat the t. So it's tukata, tukata. So that's one way of articulating using triple tonguing. And also we can use tukata on different notes. So rather than just triple tonguing on one note, we can do like a staccato triplet. So we can go and that's a matter of coordinating your fingers, the first k, t, the second k, and the third t. So if I slow that down, it goes t, k, t. And you need to practice a little bit to get fluent at it, but it's a great way of simulating on the uilleann pipes, the staccato triplets that are found in the piping tradition. So where do we put tonguing in a tune? Well, it's pretty much up to the individual player of the whistle where they want to put the tonguing. I tend to use tonguing to accent certain notes or to bring out a little bit of a, it's hard to put into words really, but a little bit of clarity in some of the ornaments, especially if I'm going from a low register to a high register. It's sometimes helpful just to give a bit more of a clean kind of sound, and a little bit of a tack on the first note. So if I'm playing a note, say going from A up to the F, and I'm going to do a roll, I'm tonguing the first note, and then I'm going, just using my breath to go up to that F sharp. So again, now what I can do to get a slightly different, more clipped sound is to tongue the first F sharp to get the roll. So I can go. So I'm going tongue, slurred, and then tonguing on the first part of the roll. So without, with. And it gives it kind of an accent. It's almost like accentuating that cut that we're getting. So using tonguing in that respect is just a different way of getting a slight accent on some of these cuts and rolls. So if I'm cutting without tonguing, I can go. So I'm cutting the. Now if I tongue and cut without, with. So it gives it a slightly different feel, a slightly different kind of tone, for want of a better word. But yeah, again, if you like it, use it, and if you don't like it, then you don't have to use it. There's no has-tos in playing whistle. You know, the only thing you have to do is to make sure your articulation is crisp and clean and that your rhythm is solid and steady. But when it comes to tonguing, it's probably a good idea if you're a beginner to start with as little as possible. And so, like I mentioned before, what I like to do is to start maybe tongue just the first note of the phrase before your breath. So every time you're going to breathe, the first note, start that off with a very gentle t. So if I'm playing a passage, so let's use the Coming of Spring again, because that's the one we've been talking about. So again, I'm going to tongue the first passage. Then the next passage. And again. So what I did was I started each phrase with a gentle t. And that's a good practice to start with. Now, you don't have to start the phrase with a t, as I mentioned before. You can just blow. And I'm sure a lot of whistle players do that. But I find that using tonguing does help with defining the first note of each phrase. And it's also a useful skill to have. And like anything, it's always good to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. And I found that in my style of whistle playing, I tend to incorporate lots of legato playing, and that legato basically just means smooth with finger movements. But I also incorporate quite a bit of tonguing for clarity, and because it's the style of whistling that I naturally gravitate to. So if I play that tune again, so within that, I was putting in a few little tight triplets, or little tongue triplets, which again, I've borrowed from the uilleann piping tradition. And I also use some triple tongue triplets as well. The other thing that using tonguing can do, it can give a little lilt to some of your playing by making the note not staccato, but making it shorter. It can give a little bit of a feel. I'll show you what I mean by that. So I can go. Yeah. So I just shorten that bottom D just a little bit to give it a little bit of a lilt and give it a little bit of a swing. And tonguing is really kind of useful to be able to do that. So let me show you again. Yeah, so go yatta 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 yatta. So it's like almost using your tongue to stop the note and make it a little bit shorter, not staccato, but kind of a halfway in between. Just taking a little bit, so there's a moment of silence to bring the next note in, and I find that helps to give it a little bit of a swing. Do we need to do that? No. Would we like to do that? That's entirely up to you, and it's something that you can find out in your own whistle playing to try and use it. And again, important things is that we don't use tonguing to mask poor finger work, and we don't use tonguing to alter our fingering in any way. Or tonguing should never get in the way of timing either. And again, the golden rule is that the pulse, the rhythm, and the tune have to stand up. And yeah, so with tonguing, it's very much a matter of choice, and how much or how little you use is kind of up to you. But the proof is in the pudding, as they say. So if you record yourself and you hear back and you hear that the tonguing works and sounds good and adds to the music, great, use it. keep going that way. If you find that the tonguing is heavy and it's dragging the time, then maybe think about working on individual aspects of your playing, and maybe you need to look at some of your finger articulation and how you're tonguing, in terms of the technique you're using, or whether you're tonguing too heavily. Or also maybe just ease back on the tonguing and maybe don't use tonguing at all, apart from starting the beginning of a phrase. Or as I mentioned earlier on, you don't have to use any tonguing whatsoever. It can all be done by your fingers. And I'm going to put up 2 videos. The first one is a video of me playing The Coming of Spring without using any tonguing whatsoever. And the second one is me playing The Coming of Spring using some tonguing. So there you have it. There's no hard and fast rules about using tonguing, but what you want to try and do is avoid tonguing on every single note, because it sounds laboured and it just doesn't flow. I'll show you what I mean by that. You can go. Yeah, it just doesn't have that kind of flow that we want in traditional Irish music. So if I play it again and just tongue the first phrase, now I'll use tonguing again, but sparingly. So there I'm incorporating a reasonable amount of tonguing, but I'm using it in a way which doesn't detract from the rhythm, and it doesn't sound sort of like it's laboured, like when you tongue each note individually. So it's a matter of kind of avoiding extremes if you want to use tonguing. So don't tongue every single note, it just doesn't sound very good. And use your tonguing to enhance your finger ornamentation. Enhance your rolls, your crans, your cuts. Don't use it instead of or in between, because it's just not going to work for you that way. So my advice for people wanting to use tonguing at the beginning, minimize your tonguing. In fact, to be able to play without tonguing at all is a very, very important skill to have. When you reintroduce tonguing back into your playing, think about how you're using it. Are you using it for note separation? Are you using it instead of cutting because your cuts maybe aren't that good? Well, then you're kind of using tonguing to overcome a finger problem, a finger articulation problem, which kind of we don't want to do that. So again, as I've mentioned before, record yourself, listen to yourself, and listen to, does your playing flow? Is it in time? Does the tune sound good? Does it sound like the tune itself? Is the rhythm in time? Is the breathing adding to the tune, or is it taking away from the tune? So when I say breathing adding to the tune, are you breathing in the correct places? Are you breathing to enhance the piece of music, or are you having to stop and get a short breath, which is getting in the way of the piece and it's elongating the tempo or the time, or even putting you out of time? So these are all important things to think about. So just to summarize tonguing, yes, it's an important skill to have, and it's an important skill to develop in your playing, but it's not essential. And if you like to play just simply using finger articulation, then do so. And there are plenty of players who use very little, if any, tonguing. Hope you found this helpful, and if you have done, please subscribe to my Whistleblowers YouTube channel and give me a like. Much appreciated, and thanks. See you soon. Bye bye.